you leave?
Well, thank you very much. I asked her to ask some nice questions, Yeah.
This is a nice
Yeah.
question.
Okay, so I left the position as a special representative for North Korea policy at the end of February. Really, two things convinced me that it was time to go. Number one is my boss then, who was Secretary of State Tillerson, was just fighting with his boss, with his Trump, And that is something that made my agency, State Department, very weak. We were being ignored, and especially on North Korea issues, I felt that we were not making progress. And second reason is that because of that, most of the work that I believe State Department should be doing on North Korea was being done by another agency, which is, of course, CIA. So I felt that given those things, I was just not spending my time usefully, that I would rather come to, Korea Foundation for Advanced Studies and talk to Son Ji-ae, Yeah.
Yes, their loss, our gain.
Yeah.
But you talked about the fact that foreign policy is pretty much driven by the White House. Within the White House, however, who drives foreign policy?
So, you're right. In the United States, and I think it's similar here, foreign policy is driven by the executive branch, which is the president and the ministries. Congress has virtually no say, they have very, very little say. And so the policy is very much driven by executive. And in this case, as you've all seen, Trump is a very strong president. So he's going to drive the policy, and he's going to drive it as he wants it. Typically, what would happen in typical US presidency is there is an NSC, National Security Council, which is headed by a national security advisor, in this case, John Bolton. And National Security Council would invite agencies, ministries like State Department, Treasury Department, Defense Department to come together and forge a common policy. So that's how it typically happens. And in this case, what I talked about earlier, that earlier on in 2016, in March, April, May, that's what happened through NSC meetings to produce what we call maximum pressure policy. And so I would say in this instance, it's the president foremost, and then the other players would be National Security Advisor, Defense Secretary, and of course State Secretary of State.
And at this point, Trump is in the love phase.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it's going to take for him? Could the time come when the NSC and Bolton takes a much harder line towards North Korea, and Trump takes that as his policy?
Well, I think there's no question in my mind that, even though National Security Advisor or anyone else may want to take a different line, it is President Trump who calls the shots. So either he changes his own mind, or he sees evidence and someone, the advisors tell him, well, maybe things are not working out the way we had planned. But it's clear that point has not come to yet, And so it may be entirely possible that President Trump is quite happy with what he has gotten so far, which is reduction in tensions, no missile test, and some sites being destroyed. And this is why what I call new equilibrium, is this sustainable? How long? Certainly it will go on until the end of this year. Is it sustainable throughout next year and into 2020 election, for example, you know? And I mean, I don't have an answer to that, you know?
Many people.
Maybe you have an
Well,
answer.
I have my own answer. I don't think that's a true answer, though.
Yeah.
Many people here are asking, though. I mean, they all seem to wonder, what do you think Trump's strategy is towards North Korea and denuclearization? Is there a
Yeah.
strategy?
Well, I do think there is a strategy, and this is, you know, it's been the case with his approach to China, the trade war. It's the case with his approach to, you know, Korea-U.S. Chorus FTA. It's the same approach to NATO, same approach to NAFTA. So he wants to go very hard and then see what happens. And I think we saw the very hard stage, which was 2017, and then the pullback stage. And so now I think he's waiting, because he's pulled back, he's waiting for some kind of significant give from Pyongyang, which has, I believe, not come yet.
What would that be?
It would be a serious step towards denuclearization. I don't think anyone expects what we call CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, but something significant. For example, I would say dismantlement of Yongbyon is a significant step. I would say declaration of their nuclear inventory that would include nuclear sites, nuclear material, how many nuclear devices they have. That's a significant step too. So there are many significant steps that North Korea could take, which falls short of complete denuclearization.
And you also talk about the fact that this could be a long-term process now, especially with the, you know, we can wait words coming from Trump. Would the DC community be okay with such a diplomatic long-term approach? There seemed to be a lot of impatience in DC.
I would say, you know, American community in general would be okay with a long-term strategy. I mean, certainly, if you look at American political body and see who are against such a long-term project, it's the Republicans.
Usually.
Yeah, usually. And so now you have a Republican president, and who pretty much controls congressional Republicans. And so I don't think there is any noise on that front. And so there are the Democrats, but those are usually those wanting diplomatic engagement and negotiations. So he's in a good place to suggest that this is we're making progress and we can move from here. I mean, the question in my mind is, when does he himself become impatient? That's the key. I don't think external events will make him impatient, as long as I said, there's no tensions. There are movements from North Korea, minor movements, but there will always be detractors, and so Trump may very well feel inclined that, hey, we've done enough, you've not done very much. I don't know when that point comes.
This is part of the top-down approach, actually the downside of the top-down approach, because we have so many leaders who've put their sort of necks on the line for this. There is the danger of the down being much harder than a process default.
So I think you're 100% right. I mean, it is my belief that leaders draw big pictures, but progress is made at a lower level that meet regularly within a framework that allows some movement. You know, I mean, you ask how long will the whole process take? I mean, there is a very famous nuclear expert from Stanford, Sig Hecker. He believes even if North Koreans say yes, you know, to denuclearization, it would take 10 years. It would take 10. And then, there's a whole idea in CVID, the I part, irreversible. Nothing is irreversible. And how can you ask the scientists to forget what they know, And so nothing is irreversible. And then there is a verification issue. North Korea is a huge country. You could probably hide a couple of bombs worth of fissile material under that table there, And so to believe that you can get complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization without complete buy-in of the North Korean leaders is dreaming,
Dr. Hecker was in Korea just a few months ago, and he actually said the same thing, what you said. But he also said that is one of the reasons why there has to be trust between North Korea and the United States. Is that your basic theory as well?
I agree completely. There has to be trust. There is, even now, no minimum degree of trust. And that is the biggest problem. And, it is very difficult, in my experience, to have a conversation with your North Korean counterparts where you speak, your own real views of what could move forward. Everything is so scripted, on both their part and on our part. So it is hard to move beyond the very surface level, and that's what we need. And to their credit, Kim Jong-un and Trump believe they have built trust. But as far as I can tell, that has not been filtered down,
And it's even more difficult when you have a history of distrust, when you've had history of, there are different versions coming from both North Koreans and the U.S. side of them feeling that they have been cheated by the other side. Do you see this process going any differently than it has been in the past?
This is why I think the key thing is to do small steps that are not easily reversible. And these small steps, for example, it's not so small, like liaison office. Once you build a liaison office, it takes an effort to, to pull it back. You build other links, like, having more visitors go back and forth, to opening up for humanitarian assistance, to have more cultural exchanges. I think these are the things that build trust. But ultimately, you have to, so for me, when I talk to North Koreans, they always mention that U.S. has to drop U.S. hostile intent. And so I asked them, what do you mean hostile intent? Can you define for me what hostile intent is? And they have a real hard problem in defining hostile intent, but they see it in everywhere. They see it in U.S. Pressing for human rights. They see it in U.S. pressing for religious freedom. They see it in U.S. support for NGOs, civil society, and they see it in actions of Congress in passing various resolutions. They see it in editorials by, whoever, your former organization, CNN,
You work for as well now.
So these are all hostile intent, and it's very hard for me to say we don't really have much control over those,
So I don't, we'll ask you later what the applause was about, but it was definitely for you, Joe. But one of the things that they have said is a part of the hostile move is the sanctions. And the easing of sanctions seems to be one of the things. You talked about the ending of the war, but it seems to be they're very looking towards what is needed for the easing of sanctions.
Well, easing of sanctions, strictly speaking, there are two types of sanctions. One that have been imposed by UN Security Council resolutions, and there are a number of them. And the ones what we might call unilateral sanctions that have been imposed by United States. And for UN-imposed sanctions, it will take UN Security Council voting to remove those sanctions. And that's going to be extremely difficult because a lot of sanctions have very clear language that these sanctions are to remain in place until there is complete denuclearization. So that's the bar. And I think it will be very difficult for the United States to vote for removal of those. The second one is the unilateral sanctions. Those are mostly implemented as legislation from Congress. So again, there has to be legislative action that goes about removing those sanctions. But it's not all black and white. You don't remove everything once. There are things like changing limits, giving them waivers, giving them pass. For example, during the Winter Olympics, we saw some sanctions waiver for some help, assistance that South Korea gave to North Korean athletes, sending was it the ASEAN plane that went there and so on. So those all involved waivers. So there are things that could be done, and clearly, I believe, North Korean expectation is, telling the U.S., you say you want to build a relationship with us, well, at least can you remove some sanctions? I think that's going to be their major ask.
But then Washington will say, this is what you need to do in order for this to happen. And what would that be?
Currently, of course, the official position is there has to be a complete denuclearization.
For any type of easing of sanctions?
For relief of sanctions. But again, once you get into negotiations, once you meet face to face, I think it is entirely possible to draw hypotheses and hypothetical scenarios. What happens if we lift it or if we increase the oil that could be imported? What will you be willing to do? Those are the kind of discussions certainly negotiators should have to probe what they can give and what they want and what the prices are. I think that to me is a constructive way to go, rather than, as you mentioned, I have many leader level meetings without much follow up.
Do you see this happening? I mean, is there a movement in Washington? I mean, is what he's saying, what Trump is saying in terms of we can wait, a signal that this kind of process is now going to begin?
I don't think so. Right now, I don't see a movement, which is why there is going to be another summit. And always when there are summits, then you prepare the groundwork towards that. So it will be interesting to see whether the preparations for the summit lead up to some of these steps being taken. And so, we'll look forward to folks like Chesani, Steve Biegun, and others getting active in probing on what we call summit deliverables might be. So that's a plus, and that's something that can get us into better place.
You're gonna open the. I know you're all dying to ask him questions, so we're gonna open the floor up. So before we do that, so my question is: do you think you will ever see, and it depends on how long we're going to live, but that you will ever see a denuclearized North Korea? Honestly.
I don't think denuclearization will happen quickly, soon. I mean, I do hope it happens. I plan to live for a long time, so I do hope it happens while I'm alive. I think, as you mentioned, someone mentioned, trust is very important. And, you know, there are many interpretations on why North Korea has nuclear weapons. My belief is North Korea has nuclear weapons for regime survival, you know. I believe regime survival is their foremost goal. I don't believe, you know, it is there for other reasons. And so if regime survival can be assured, then it is possible. But I mean, you know, it is how do they, you know, so it's a very, very tough thing to convince them that there will be regime continuity beyond nuclear weapons.
Well, I mean, that is very much the part of the reason they developed nuclear weapons. But for them not to give that up, is that the same thing?
You know, the history of countries giving up nuclear weapons, there are not that many who have given up voluntarily. And so I think, you know, we've stopped many countries from becoming nuclear, but once they have nuclear weapons, it's been pretty tough to convince them to give up. And so I think this is a challenge, and it's a huge challenge. However, it does not mean we should not try, you know. And it's a tough task. It does not mean we should not try. It does not mean that we should accept them as a nuclear weapon state. And I believe, you know, through trying, external environments may change. And so I think that's what it takes to keep on trying.
Okay, with that relatively optimistic note, we're going to open the floor for questions. I have one hand up right here, right in the beginning.
Thank you very much for your plausible explanations. It suddenly reminds me what I saw after 2002 October when James Kelly visited Pyongyang. Kim Kye-kwan declared North Korea had already nuclear has and continued to develop it. So complete collapse of Geneva Agreement. And that the January 2003, I read an article written by some professional, Stanford University. These all scenarios are North Korean tactic, just taking time, showing up themselves in Geneva talks and six-part talks, but without any plausible reason they withdraw. They want take time. Every year they can produce at least one or two nuclear heads. And then after 10 years, they will ask all of us to recognize North Korea as nuclear power. I'm afraid we are in the same path. So you are saying among four different possibilities, take time, step by step, incremental progress, which we failed already in six-part talks and Geneva talks. When we have step by step, the long-term process, first thing, you need to have trust. Once you agree to something, but suddenly deny it, then you cannot have trust and continue to develop it. But I'm afraid time is not on our side. Trump can lose presidential election, middle election, but Kim Jong-un can stay there for a long, long time. So I'm afraid Trump is not also a reliable partner or negotiator, because when we see he withdraw from Iran nuclear talks without any the acceptable reasons, So North Korea learned a lot of things there. Then we are going to the same path of Geneva, failed Geneva talks and the six-part talks. How can you explain it? Thank you. First, did I introduce myself?
No, you didn't.
Ah,
Kwon.
sorry. My name is Tae-shin Kwon, and I'm now President and CEO of Korea Economic Research Institute. And then I'm former Korean ambassador to the OECD. And then Joseph is my good friend also.
I think you're
and,
also
Jia is also my good friend.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're
Great-
also a
great tennis
minister
player.
too,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
You know?
Great tennis player too.
Yeah, and I think minister outranks ambassador, you know. Thank you, Ambassador Kwon. I mean, you know, I have a friend, Victor Cha, and he calls North Korea land of bad options, you know. And so, I mean, I agree with you. We've tried it. It's going to take a long time. Even then, we don't know the outcome. But what is the alternative? There is no alternative in my view, you know. And to imagine that US or anyone will go in by force and to take it out, it's going to involve, you know, a war on Korean Peninsula, which which is unthinkable. And again, I do think maximum pressure, and I mean, you saw that. I mean, I believe a year ago, we were, you know, it was, to me, we were in danger of tensions overflowing. And which is why I think President Moon did a great thing in opening up a dialogue. And so I just don't see there are any options. And this is a leap of faith. And to me, I'm still undecided that is Kim Jong-un sincere? Is he sincere in saying that he will pursue a different path which involves economic benefits for the North Korean people? Is he sincere in saying that he wants a new type of relationship with South Korea, with the US, and with the international community? I don't know, you know, but certainly it feels different in my view. Kim Jong-un feels different from his father or grandfather. And so it's, again, a hypothesis worth testing.
Why do you feel different?
Why do I feel different?
Why do you feel like he's different?
I think he's different in the sense that he is much more serious than his father or grandfather about economic reform. And it may be that the reform or marketization of North Korean economy has progressed to the extent that he cannot hold back anymore. And it may be that the information that goes into North Korea has led North Koreans towards more expectations of what their life should be like. It may also be that Kim Jong-un thinks he's a complete, you know, I don't know what you want to call it, a ruler, a benevolent ruler who has everything, that he can control everything, so he can do both, you know? Now, that does not mean I believe he's willing to denuclearize, but it could mean that he is willing to pursue a path that is different from his father and from grandfather. So, again, you know, I am not sure I'm there convinced yet, but again, I think we need to test that out.
Okay, next question. Yes, I see a young woman in the middle. Yes.
During your talk today, you mentioned that North Korea takes a lot of things as a hostile intent from the US side. You made the religious freedom or the support of the CSOs as one of those examples, which I believe is the values that make America as America. So you mentioned a lot of options on the nuclear issues on North Korea, but on the human rights issue, which will be the, I believe, an important value for the Americans, what do you think are the steps that we can take with the current environment and the political turbulence?
This is a very important question. What role should human rights play in dealing with North Korea? As a negotiator, obviously, I would rather have human rights play no role because they're going to object. But then you're not representing the values and the fundamental importance of human rights for the United States, or for that matter, for South Korean international community. And so you are always having to juggle it up. And so right now, the Trump administration, probably much more than any previous administration, has made human rights less of an agenda with North Korea. But that's been the case, I would say, for many negotiations that have worked. But in the end, it's going to be an issue because what North Korea wants is a peace treaty with the United States that has to be ratified by Congress. And you better believe it, in any ratification process, Congress will insist human rights as a key part of agreement with North Korea. So whether negotiators like it or not, we worry about expediency, reaching to a signature. It's going to be an important factor, and there's never going to be a proper normalization of relations between North Korea and United States without addressing human rights.
And so in this instance, do you see a better opportunity to deal with North Korea human rights than before?
No. No. I mean, you cannot deal with human rights situation. It has to be dealt, I believe, in a separate forum. I really don't think it can be dealt in denuclearization forum. I've always believed that human rights is much more of a multilateral agenda, that it should be dealt by UN Security Council, UN Human Rights Commission, and multilateral bodies. Otherwise, the bilateral agenda becomes too burdened. For me, it would be far better if we had human rights deal in a body that is different from bilateral. But ultimately, U.S. has to deal with it.
But the leverage to get any, as you know, North Korea does not want to deal with human rights. But any kind of leverage to get them to deal with any type of human rights normalization and things like that have to come into play.
It has to come into play. The reason why I say it has to be more multilateral agenda is human rights covers many rights, but mostly U.S. is interested in things like political rights, things like freedom of speech, freedom of movement. But there are also other rights, such as freedom from hunger, shelter rights, education rights, women's rights. And so this is why they have to be mixed so that you can make some progress in some branch. If you insist on political rights, freedom of movement rights, free speech rights, it's not going to work.
Okay. We have, let's take this gentleman first and then you later, right afterwards. Okay.
무엇을 주고받을 것인가라는 측면에서 질문드리고 있습니다. 지난달 말에 독일에 본사를 두고 있는 광물 에너지 다국적 기업하고 미국의 최대 곡물 회사가 극비리에 방북했다는 그런 보도가 있었습니다만 미국은 겉으로는 대북 제재를 외치면서 속으로는 북한의 지하자원, 특히 히토류를 선점하려 한다. 그런 우려 섞인 목소리도 있습니다. 트럼프 대통령이 굉장히 그 실리에 밝은 성격이라고 볼 때 과연 북한의 지하 자원이 얼마나 매력적인 것인가? 그리고 장래 대북 제재를 대비해서 비핵화와 곡물, 지하 자원을 주고받을 수 있는 옵션으로 준비하고 있는 것이라고 생각하시는지. 예, 이상입니다.
Thank you. 전 한국말이 조금 서툴어서 인터프리테이션이 없거든요. So is this about the mineral rights?
Sorry. Let me
Yeah.
let me interpret a little bit. Yes. So I think and 혹시 are you getting Korean into 한국말은 들리시는 거죠? 네. 혹시 제가 통역이 틀렸으면 말씀해 주세요. So the interpretation basically is that if that there's a lot of talk about the U.S. actually wanting the first rights to North Korea's mineral resources.
That's what I thought. No, I mean, this is also the issue that remember Iraq war that U.S. wanted oil from Iraq. We probably spent 10 times more money than in that war than the oil is worth. So to imagine that somehow U.S. is interested in mineral in North Korea, I think that's beyond pale. I mean, so I completely don't accept that. I mean, I do think there are some companies who wants to work with North Korea, but certainly there is nothing that would indicate that U.S. government has any intention to drill for, uranium or rare earth or, manganese in North Korea. I think I don't believe that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think there's a young gentleman in the yellow shirt. That was one.
Hello, I'm Semini, university student at KNOU. I have one question. Does the U.S. consider the option that turn North Korea into pro-U.S. and use it to prevent the Chinese ambition? I think Korea and Manchuria are strategic position in the East Asia, and some people say, does Trump play fourth dimension chess? I think it is the great game between United States and China. Thank you.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Is how much of all this is an issue between China and U.S. And so I was in China about a month ago. I engaged a lot of Chinese experts on North Korea, and Chinese experts tell me that, and I believe them, that they really have no issues with unified Korea as long as there is no U.S. troop presence. And so for Chinese, they clearly see Korean Peninsula issues as a strategic competition between U.S. and China. And so I think that's very important to them. Now, Chinese, I also believe, really do value denuclearization because they really don't want one of their neighbors. And by the way, Chinese obviously consider Korea important, but not to be in such a big power to have nuclear weapons, So they clearly don't want North Korea to have nuclear weapons. But at the same time, they believe that what is worse than nuclear North Korea is a North Korea that is strategically allied with the United States. So I think that's a very important point for China. Now, how much of it is strategic competition? Of course, U.S. is competing with China. China is competing with the United States. But ultimately, I do believe, U.S. is a distant power. So in that sense, if the Korean people wanted American troops to leave Korea, then I think U.S. is perfectly capable of withdrawing. And you saw that in the 70s in Philippines, you know? And so, I mean, there is a question. So ultimately, U.S. clearly believes this is a matter for Korean people to decide. Would the U.S. prefer to stay here? Yes. But that preference is not so strong as to stay here beyond the welcome, you know?
Yes. Someone talked about the fact that the very fact that if there was better relations between Washington and Beijing, that we would not be where we are now.
You know, and again, Chinese have the attitude that these are issues, the North Korean nuclear issue, that big countries should resolve together. In other words, this is not an issue that Japan should play a role or South Korea should play a role. It's an issue, it should be between China and United States. You know, and which is of course unacceptable for the United States because it's an issue that matters, that security, fundamental security and alliance issues are very part of. I mean, you can imagine, you know, it was bad enough, the agreed framework in 1999, where South Korea felt that South Korea did not play enough of a role. So if we were to happen, I think it would, you know, mean practically end of the alliance. And so this is not something that United States is prepared to do.
Okay. Next question. We have you have two women on the side.
My question is, Mr. Minister, you told was making a statement that the North Korea, especially the Kim Jong-un, has a more serious about denuclearization in North Korea compared to his father or his grandfather. But there are talks in the foreign policymakers that even Kim Jong-un decide that he's serious about denuclearization. Can he seriously make a decision himself without consultation with China? Because there are signs that Chinese state-owned companies has been helping North Korea nuclear arm with nuclear weapons. So in your view, and also Kim Jong-un paid visit 3 times before the summit meeting in Singapore. So in your view, do you think that Kim Jong-un himself can make the serious decision without consulting with China?
I think you make a good point, which is, can Kim Jong-un himself make a denuclearization point? I think he can do it. And again, I do believe Chinese would welcome denuclearized North Korea, provided that their security stays intact, you know, and that American presence is not there. So I don't think that's so much the issue. To me, can he make the decision to denuclearize solely by himself without the party or the military being behind him, you know? To me, that is an issue. I mean, you know, every ruler has to make sure the important elements of your support base is behind you. And whether he has that support base, I don't know. And which is why I think he is insisting on items such as end of war declaration, such as peace treaty, to show his people that the threat, external threat from US, threat from South Korea, has reduced.
Next question. Yes,
사실은 아까 그 미스터 윤이 계속 그 말씀하셨던 것처럼 New Equilibrium이라든지 New Normal에 대해서 굉장히 자주 언급을 하셨는데 사실은 그 한반도 문제의 당사자로서 대한민국이 지금 뭐 여러 가지 뭐 북한의 진정성이라든지 그런 것에 대해서도 걱정을 하고 있지만 실제로 미국에 대해서도 걱정하는 것이 저는 제가 생각하기에 미국이 만약에 비핵화의 과정에서 이런 중간에 이런 뉴 노멀에 만족하고 그러니까 ICBM을 그러니까 폐기하는 것에만 만족하고 실질적인 그러니까 conventional weapons 재래식 무기를 폐기를 하지 않고 실질적으로 대한민국에 위협이 될 만한 무기는 남겨두고 ICBM의 폐기만 한 채 이제 그 대북 협상을 중단을 한다면 사실은 대한민국에 있어서는 굉장히 큰 위협이 되지 않을까라는 생각을 합니다. 그래서 이것에 대해서는 미국의 입장이 정확히 어떤 것인지 그리고 미스터 윤께서는 어떻게 생각하고 계신지 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
Well, thank you very much. You know, that's a tough question. I mean, but my belief is that there is huge opposition in U.S. to a nuclear North Korea. So, I mean, to me, this is a little bit of a problem, the way South Korea looks at it and the way the U.S. looks at it. In U.S., I mean, in South Korea, there is a feeling that through reconciliation with North Korea, they can be denuclearized, you know? And that, you know, the goal is denuclearization, but you get there through reconciliation. But I think it's the other way around for most Americans, which is reconciliation is the reward for denuclearization, you know? So reconciliation is not a tool to get to denuclearization, but it's the end product. So in other words, denuclearization has to come before reconciliation.
But couldn't the promise of reconciliation be the
Absolutely, you know. So it's you know, there is a carrot. Should they eat some carrot before?
to taste the fact that the carrot is good? You have to, yeah.
You know.
So that's the.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the Americans, carrot comes at the end.
Also, part of the question, I don't know if our non-Korean speaking audience got was the fact that the U.S. might just deal with North Korea's nuclear issue and then not deal with the other arsenal, the artillery that North Korea has that could devastate South Korea. And that would be a big concern to South Korea if the United States, correct me if I'm wrong, if the United States stopped and said, okay, it's okay for you to have weapons that target South Korea, and as long as you don't have weapons that target the United States. So if you could address that.
I mean that's all, it's a complicated question, because if there are weapons that are threatening the U.S., there is an issue of how strong the alliance can be. This is the dilemma. If there are ICBMs that can really reach U.S., how much is the security guarantee, the security retaliation, the mutual defense, is that compromised, And but however, I mean, I think the experience with Europeans, especially during the Cold War, shows it does not have to be compromised, and hence, at that time, actually, U.S. gave number of European countries tactical nuclear weapons to make sure that they also have a response, And so, I mean, this is the trap you get into if you get into further nuclear issues. Then the tactical nuclear weapons becomes a factor.
Okay. Yes, gentleman in the front.
Just listening to the lecture, I actually had a lot of frustrations and concern at the same time. And you mentioned the 4 options, and you kind of seems to say that the last option, political dialogue and negotiation, may be the only viable option. In terms of maximum pressure, the UN sanctions and unilateral US sanctions, how effective is it at this time? And from the point of North Koreans, is it really hurting them? And if it's effective, let's say, big stick, how long can it last before it falls apart? That's among the European allies and even other, China, Russia, maybe kind of, maybe objecting to it and it make it weaken. So at this time, just my personal feeling is that it may be the only stick at this time available. And so could you make a comment on that, please?
Yeah. My understanding of sanctions is that it has been quite effective. And you see that through trade numbers with China. There has been huge decline of trade between North Korea and China. And clearly, evidence suggests that China has in place still a lot of sanctions. They have not been let go. However, I think we all must remember that sanctions erode naturally over time. Unless you put on new sanctions, existing sanctions erode because traders find ways of getting around sanctions, and you see that quite a bit. So, of course, sanctions are not as effective today as, as they were a year ago, you know? And they will continue to erode. It is clearly the position of China, Russia, to give formal sanctions relief. So I think that also indicates they're willing to, let erosion continue. I think it is very important because this is clearly the most highest priority item that is requested by North Korea to give sanctions relief. Now, you must remember again the distinction between sanctions lifting and sanctions relief. You can give, it's not a black or white. It's not either sanctions or no sanctions. You can have partial sanctions. You can have some relief from those sanctions. So that's a tool that the negotiators can use, and let's see how far they get with that.
There has been a lot of reports in domestic news about the fact that Washington is not happy with South Korea's position on softening sanctions. How much do you think of that? Is that true?
Well, I think, the Americans in general want to maintain as strict a sanctions regime as possible. And so that is clear that, you've seen this not only in official sanctions, but even even on things like humanitarian assistance that are not included in sanctions, that I think U.S. policy is to come down hard to limit as much as possible at the moment, so that, in the future, when you do open up, you have more tools to play with, So I think it's strategic, or tactical, I would say. I'm personally against sanctioning humanitarian assistance. I think North Korea needs humanitarian assistance, especially in medicine and so on.
Yes, we have now time for more questions. Yes, there's me in the way in the back. I will get to you way in the back next time.
방금 윤 대사께서 말씀하신 미국이 남한의 태도에 대해서 가지는 감상, 그거하고 관련해서 남한 우리 한국 사람들 상당수는 미국하고 북한의 네고시에이션이 잘 되기를 바랍니다. 동시에 남한도 북한하고 가능하면은 좋은 관계를 유지하고 개선하기를 바랍니다. 그런데 조금 전에 언급이 있었습니다만 남한이 북한하고 조금 더 관계 개선을 해서 그리고 미국하고 북한 간의 관계 개선에 도움이 되고자 하는데 그에 대해서 미국은 사사건건 표현이 좀 그렇습니다만은 반대를 하고 브레이크를 걸고 그러지 않는가 그 점에 대해서 내가 느끼기에는 상당수 한국 사람들이 불만족스럽고 특히 금강산의 관광이라든지 개성공단은 이미 핵 문제가 제기되기 전부터 남북 간의 관계가 이루어졌던 상황인데 그것을 다시 재개하고자 하는 데 대해서도 미국이 언짢은 신호를 자꾸 보내는데 그에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시는지 하고 그리고 남북 간의 그래도 관계 개선은 국제적인 생션 스캠에서는 조금 예외를 둘 수 있는 그런 여지가 없는가에 대해서 듣고 싶습니다.
Well, thank you very much. I think you're right, of course. The lens with which Washington looks at North Korea is different from the lens with which South Korea looks at North Korea. And I think you have to remember that for South Korean government, North Korea is number one political issue. It's a number one issue, domestic politics. It's how Koreans define themselves. You're progressive if you believe in reconciliation. You are conservative if you believe that this is a regime that should not survive, you know. So this is a deeply emotional issue and political issue. In the United States, it's not so political issue. It's much more what I would call a technical issue, where you look at should they have nuclear weapons or should they not have nuclear weapons? How much threat does the conventional military in North Korea pose? What would happen, you know, in various scenarios? So, you know, even though people think, South Koreans think that somehow North Korea is an election issue in the United States, it is not, you know. There is not one congressional seat that will come up in November that people will say, oh, this seat went because of North Korea policy, you know. It is completely not an election issue. So that is so the way that I think the two societies, two political bodies look at it is quite different. So going back to your issue of like Kaesong-gongdan or Kumgang Mountain, the Americans will look at it that through Kaesong-gongdan, so much money went directly to North Korea in foreign currency that allowed their nuclear program and missile program to develop, you know? And so this is why Kaesong-gongdan should not, you know, operate. Same thing with Kumgang Mountain. This is, you know, this is just a, you know, both of them were like, you know, ATM, you know, you put in your card and you get money, you know. And so while in South Korea, these are emotional issues. These are emotional issues that signify, you know, whether there is a budding relationship with North Korea, whether peace is possible, whether, you know, you can have, is this a sign that will happen for family reunion, people allowed to travel and so on. So this is why it is very different, I would say, the way Americans look at it, the way from South Koreans look at it.
We have a young gentleman way in the back.
I have a specific question regarding the effects of the declaration to end the Korean War and its effects to the ROK-US alliance. Because it seems like if the treaty, the current status quo of the armistice, switches to the peace treaty, then the justification of the UN command is it becomes weaker, and this would also lead to, I would say, challenges to the justification for the US FK to stay in Korea. And this kind of worries a lot of people in Korea regarding the current status quo of the ROK-US alliance. So from the US perspective, what do you think about the current declaration of ending the Korean War between the North Korea and South Korea, and how it can affect the ROK-US alliance in the future? Thank you.
I think if handled properly, it should not affect US-South Korean alliance, USFK issues, and so on. And what does it mean, handled properly? I think the end of war declaration should have a number of elements in it. Number one is obviously you say the war has ended, and I think it has to be accompanied by first that armistice arrangement that was signed in 1953 remains in effect until there is a replacement agreement, which is presumably a peace treaty. The second thing it has to say, I believe, is that it is the sovereign right of South Korea to negotiate without any interference the alliance issues. So that way, USFK presence, US troop presence in South Korea is above, is not an issue that North Korea is concerned with. The third element I believe an end of war declaration must have is some language on denuclearization. It must have some language on denuclearization that would state that North Korea will denuclearize. And then fourth element is, of course, that there should be additional agreements on conventional forces. So those are the four parts that certainly, I would like to see in an end of war declaration, so that, it is a standalone document, but also linked with armistice, linked with a future peace treaty, and also linked with sovereignty of a Republic of Korea.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, over there. Yeah.
Where? Oh, there you go.
My question is, I want to ask you a question about the phase or the process towards denuclearization. I mean, a traditional process of achieving denuclearization would be a country providing its list of nuclear stockpile and having that verified from the other states. But in terms of when talking about North Korea, because it's almost near the stage of completing its nuclear weapons program, some people say there had been a moment when some people would say that that process would have to be carried out in a different manner. For example, like North Korea first dismantling its key facilities and then verifying whether that has happened properly. What's the general view about this within Washington? I mean, it's South Korea's foreign minister has also talked about that. So I'm wondering what Washington, how Washington views this new approach of achieving denuclearization. And to add on to that, at the Inter-Korean Summit last month, Pyongyang even offered to dismantle its Yongbyon nuclear facilities if there is a corresponding measure from the U.S., but still the U.S. is very firm on keeping its sanctions. So I'm just wondering whether dismantling its Yongbyon nuclear facilities was not an attractive enough option for the U.S. to take any sort of reciprocal action towards North Korea. Thank you.
Well, denuclearization is very complicated, and for the young people here, this is a good business to go into. It's going to last for a long time,
Profitable.
It's a steady job, yeah. But to me, denuclearization, it should properly begin with stopping the program. is called freeze. You know, it should begin with stopping the program, and then it moves to how do you verify that the program has stopped. So I see as the first place a freeze, and then second, verification of that freeze. And then the third phase is really you begin then dismantling. And then, fourth phase is you break that down and take it away. There is a key question, and this is, I think, what you were referring to. When does North Korea give a declaration of their nuclear inventory, including, all the fissile material and so on? Of course, as a negotiator, you want to know what they have, and this is is a reasonable thing to ask. I'm asking you to get rid of your stuff. Can you tell me what stuff you have? But of course, for North Koreans, and again, it's not an unreasonable position, is, you haven't done anything, and you're asking me everything I have, so you're saying, come to the table without any clothes, and you're still wearing all your clothes. Maybe that's the wrong analogy for these days, but so for them, a declaration of their inventory, what stuff they have, it comes either in the middle or the end, and so it's what we call sequencing. How do you sequence each steps? And clearly, there is no reason to worry about if they are completely decided on denuclearization. But if they are not decided, they are willing to kind of look at what you have done and what I have done, then sequencing is a key issue. When do you begin freeze, and what do you freeze? When do you begin dismantling, and what do you dismantle? And when do you show everything that you have, And that's verification, obviously. It's a tricky thing, especially when there is no trust. And if there is no trust, how can you say the declaration of nuclear inventory they have given you is true or not, Then, which is why you need verification,
And because there is no trust, we're already hearing things like that we've heard before, like the U.S. keeps moving its goalposts. That this kind of what they're demanding is keep changing again, and which
I mean, I would not agree with that. I mean, it's if you look, I mean, there are so many denuclearization documents. We had one in six-party talks, we had one in agreed framework. And before that, North-South Basic Agreement on denuclearization. So I don't think it's a matter of changing the goalpost, but it's a matter of what is the goal, And are you willing to go to that goal? You've agreed to these goals before, but now you're saying you don't want to go there, So it's a very involved issue. And this is why it will take, as Sid Hecker says, 10 years, even if there is willingness on North Korean part.
Was there a gentleman in the back? Yes.
예, 수고하십니다. 저는 일반 기업인인데요. 저희들이 장사하는데 제일 불만은 이렇게 어지러우니까 장사하기가 굉장히 곤란합니다. 예, 그래서 이걸 하루빨리 좀 정상화시켜 주길 바라는데요.
예.
지금 아까 좋은 말씀 들었는데 지금 핵심은 핵무기가 되는 거죠? 대사님, 핵무기죠? 그래서 옛날 속담에 우리는 핵무기는 핵으로 다스려야 된다고 저는 생각합니다. 첫째, 지금 하고 있는 경제 압박 잘한다고 봅니다. 그걸 통해서 어떻게든지 핵무기를 포기하고 자유로운 이런 세계로 나오도록 하는 건 좋으신데 하나가 부족한 건 우리가 잘할 수 있는, 미국이 잘할 수 있는 무력 압박 한 걸음 더 나아가서 혹시나 하지만은 한반도 핵무기 재배치를 통해서 경제와 군사를 동시에 압박을 해서 스스로 자기들이 못 견디게 되는 순간까지 꾸준히 가신다면 이렇게 우왕좌왕할 필요 없이 그 핵심을 꾸준히 밀어주신다면 우리가 볼 때도 잘 가는구나. 조금 시간이 더 가면 경제와 군사 두 개가 같이 가물해서 자기들이 핵에 대해서 이런 말 저런 말 할 말이 없어질 거라고 봅니다. 그러나 경제는 남기 때문에 경제는 못합니다. 그렇기 때문에 자기들이 손을 들 수밖에 없다고 저는 생각합니다. 대사님 의견이 어떠신지?
I agree with you. I think the real problem for so long has been flip-flop in policy, both in Washington and Seoul. So this inconsistent policy, going from hardline to engagement and back to hardline, it is not helpful. And so there must be, I think you're right, whether it's one or the other, there must be a predictable framework. Because North Korea has a predictable framework. It's just that, democracy is what it is, and foreign policy, as I said, changes quite a bit with the new president. So I'm completely sympathetic that we need more consistent, whether it's engagement or whether it's pressure policy, and that's what it's been lacking.
The other part of his question might have been, as a part of the pressure policy, we have talked about economic sanctions, but what about the military possibilities, whether we are upping our military, and one of the things was putting tactical nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula?
I mean, I myself don't believe, more enhanced military posture in terms of tactical nuclear weapons or more strategic weapons, more provocative exercise. I'm not sure those are helpful. That will certainly hurt your business.
기업에는 굉장히 안 좋을 거라고 말씀하시는 거니까. 네.
Maybe one last question?
Yes, maybe just one last question if we want to go. Yes. The gentleman in the back just raised it just a little bit quicker than you. Yeah.
박사님께서 지금 말씀하신 거는 장기간 우리가 최소 10년 이상이 소요될 거로 보고 있는데, 제가 군사적인 측면에서 좀 우려하는 것은 북한의 핵 활동이 지금도 되고 있다는 게 CIA에서 가근욱 보도가 되고 있거든요. 그랬을 때 상당히 북핵이 고도화되고 정밀화되고 또 생산을 계속했을 때 나중에 핵 비핵화 문제가 더 실제 협상에서 어려워지고 많은 비용을 지출해야 될 것이고, 또 이제 그러면 우리 한국 정부에서는 평화 공존을 어떻게 해나갈 것인가, 이렇게 심각한 고민을 좀 해야 되거든요. 그래서 이 핵 위협이 없는 상태로 상당히 공존하는 그 방법은 또 제재하고 이런 게 맞물려 가지고 굉장히 어려울 것인데, 박사님의 그 코멘트를 좀 좋은 의견을 주시면 좋겠습니다.
If you could ask, he could also ask his question.
My name is Jaebam Kim. I'm working for the Korean American Association. The criticisms from the Korean journalists as well as the U.S. press is that there is some sort of lacking communication and coordination between the two governments. For instance, during the recent state visits to the European nations, President Moon, seemingly without consultation with the U.S. government, made a series of diplomatic démarches for easing sanctions. So my question is, if it is true that we seriously lack of consultation, communication, and close collaboration between our two governments. Is it more serious question than during the time that you were active in the negotiation with the North Koreans? And how do you foresee in the future, will it be better in the future because of pressure from both peoples and journalism? Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the first question, I completely agree that all signs are that North Korea is continuing to accumulate fissile nuclear material. And this is a serious problem, which is why the very next step has to be, a freeze, complete freeze, so that no more nuclear material is produced. I think that's a very, very important next step. They've stopped testing, so next step has to be stopping production, you know. On the gentleman behind you, regarding the U.S. South Korea dialogue and coordination, you know, I mean, this is, of course, nothing unusual that Seoul and Washington are going at different speed. Of course, you want the two allies to go at same speed, but you know, it's like, you know, sometimes it's inevitable. Even with your wife, I'm sure you go at different speed, you know. And so the answer to that, the remedy to that, is to, as you say, has to have more coordination, more consultation, and more understanding of each other's position. So I think that's very important. And, you know, of course, as a Korean American myself, this is what I want to see. And is it better or is it worse than before? I mean, I've worked here twice. It was pretty stressful during Nomeon era, you know. And so I don't think this is unique. What is unique is that, you know, we now see much more press coverage. People are speaking to press a lot more than they should, probably. Okay? Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Joe's gone through a bottle and a half, I think, of water. We've had a very intensive discussion that we've of pretty much done everything.
Everything.
So, thank you very much and have a good evening. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
감사합니다.